Thank you.
Delighted you're here. Have a seat. Have a seat, Ed. So and we blank that out. There we go. So the number one question, let's check the biblical literacy of this crowd. Where does your first name, Ashbel, you're not Ashton, you're Ashbel, Ashbel C. Williams. Does anyone know where Ashbel comes from? Drum roll, drum roll. So it's the first book of the Bible. Towards the back end of it, about chapter 46 or so, I think.
You're the expert.
And do you want to finish it?
Yeah, this is a great story. As a child, people called me Ash, and that's a name where the consonants are really critical. And that made for a very long period in elementary school. And I felt that I'd been dealt a bad hand with that name. You know, I suffered a lot. And years and years later, my wife was doing some sort of Bible study and reading the Old Testament, and found that I think it was the house of Asher, and Ashbel was the elder, and there were two other brothers. She said, "Do you know what the other brothers' names were? You've been whining about this naming thing all your life. The other brothers were Huppum and Muppum." Now just cut it out.
Exactly. No, in fact, I kind of had to read it a few times myself. It was the 10 sons of Rachel and Benjamin, and you were son number 3 according to this. So now, in your real life, did you have any brothers and sisters?
I did, but as number 3, I've always tried harder, even harder than number 2. I have 2 older sisters.
Right. All right. And did they get good names?
Susan and Elizabeth, pretty easy to deal with. Yeah.
So, as mentioning, my wife and I actually spent a lot of time in Florida, South Florida, and it's actually hard to find someone who's born there, particularly in Miami-Dade County. But you're actually a born and bred Floridian, are you not?
Not only that, my family was in Florida literally before it was a state. And when the original survey was done for what was then the territory of Florida to be admitted as a state, George Washington's surveying firm was called upon to do that job. And the surveyor it was given to was a gentleman named Marcellus Williams, who with two or three other surveyors and a group of mules somehow did a survey of the entire state of Florida. Now, how you could do that in 1840 without being eaten by an animal or a person, I have no idea. That's an animal. Okay. In small bites. But remarkable. How they did that, I have no idea.
If you don't mind, so you have a family of Episcopalian roots. Tell us a bit about your aunts that we were chatting about earlier. And these are your aunts, not
right.
the biting kind.
Right.
Or did they bite? I don't know, your aunts.
Not me, at any rate. But our old family home was in a place called Fernandina, Florida, and in which you would know better these days as Amelia Island. And the old fishing village of Fernandina is a natural Atlantic port and is one of the oldest towns in Florida. And the first Episcopal church in Florida was built there. My aunt's names are on a couple of the pews. And the story handed down in the family lore was that they would sit on the front porch of the family home and drink gin and tonics in the hot time of the year before sundown. And the priest would come tootling along and would stop to say, "Hello, ladies," and, "Oh my, I see you're having a beverage." "Yes, we're having a bit of lemonade. Won't you join us?" And he did, and had a couple of lemonades on his first visit and said, "My, these are extraordinary lemonades." And apparently, he coincidentally showed up every night for about the next 5 years. There's something unusual about that lemonade, a slightly bitter flavor, but gosh, it was refreshing.
So you have Episcopalian blood running through your veins. Today there's a lot of research. I work with some amazing scholars down at Princeton. Bob Withnow is one of them who studies trends in religious patterns and changes. And one of the new trends is really a lack of denominational loyalty, that you may be raised Methodist, Protestant, whatever, different forms of any tradition. But as you grow, you don't necessarily follow the tradition of your parents and grandparents. You have, out of curiosity, any reason of that?
I think two.
Was it the lemonade?
Well, the lemonade, yes. The lemonade is excellent. I guess I've always liked tradition. I've always liked old things, and I've always liked repeatable habits. as long as they have good outcomes. I mean, banging your head on a wall could be a repeatable habit, but the reward ratio is low to the behavior. So I've always found the nature of the Episcopal service refreshing, if that's a term, grounding, relaxing, comforting. I guess comforting is probably the best term. So I've never felt the need to shop for, religious brands or fashion or tried to trade up or anything like that. I'm very comfortable right where I am, and I'm just one of these old-fashioned people that likes things that work. I mean,
there's a concept, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've got ties that are 30 years old. Well, I'm not going to change them.
And just while we're kind of in that space, did, perhaps like me or many people, I had a chapter in my life where I wanted nothing to do with the church or anything religious. It was all hypocritical and no sense. Did you ever have a period like that in your life?
I don't know that I would say I had a period quite like that. It was more like a period of not going to church and not thinking about religion because of the common characteristic of young people that you perceive that you know everything. And, why are these people tootling off and blowing half a day on Sunday with this church business? And they're all there for other reasons anyway, so I don't need to do that. I'd rather go fishing. And the ocean will be my church. I can remember saying that to myself for about 20 years, and it was pretty nice being offshore. It was very peaceful, but
yeah.
When you're really challenged in life, I think organized religion is a safe harbor.
Interesting. Play that out a bit more. What's a safe harbor? Particularly in people like in this room and yourself in a position of not a small amount of responsibility. Talk about this safe harbor a bit.
Well, at its most fundamental level, if you have something that's really a major life event, a death, a birth, a marriage, those events, some of them, like the positive ones, are positive on their face, but they gain depth and dimension when put in a religious context. Because now you're putting it in the historical context of all of the experience of humankind going back thousands of years. But those are experiences that go very well without the religious side of it because they're happy. You get the other. Some sort of very destructive loss that's really hard to cope with by yourself. And many people find they're simply out of their depth, they're lost, they can't function. They need some way to put that in a context to get past it. Or if they've done something horrible for whatever reason, humans do bad things pretty regularly and they're shamed. And imagine how novel the notion of forgiveness is at that time. When, particularly if it's something public and you've been deeply humiliated, and particularly if you really did something bad. I mean, I'm happy to say I've not been in that place, but I suspect you just want to crawl into a hole and never be seen again. And to have somebody say, you're not the first person that did something terrible, and there is a concept of forgiveness, and you don't even have to earn your way back in. It's just there. Now, you would hope that if somebody took advantage of that forgiveness, that they would try and live the rest of their life in a way that they sort of paid it back. But I don't think that's a requirement.
No. That's a very beautiful way to describe one of the sort of profound concepts of the Christian tradition. Beautiful way to describe it. We were talking earlier about if you put 20 people in a room, statistically, one of them, I don't know if this is what a Southern gentleman would say, but I would say as a Yankee, one of them is going to be a dirt ball.
Where's a phrase for that?
There's other phrases. That is someone that is going to try to get over on the system any chance they can. They're not playing by the same set of rules. They're a bad actor. And Even if they're caught, they may not necessarily repent, literally or figuratively. Then they're off to the next thing, trying to scam the next organization. Whether it's 1 in 20 or 1 in 50, we could quibble about the numbers,
Right.
but play out that story we were talking about a bit.
Well, I've managed organizations most of my life, and the vast majority of them have been good sized. The smallest ones have been 100 or more people, and the biggest ones have been 1,000 or so. And we were talking about this earlier, and I was saying the law of large numbers is when you get a certain sample size of human beings, you'll have somebody, the southern dirtball who's just plain sorry. I don't know what's wrong with him, he's just sorry.
And add that to my vocabulary.
Yeah, he's just sorry. And early in my career, I think I had a problem as an executive that I tended to be loyal to a fault. If I had someone who worked for me that I thought was trying hard, and they were essentially a good person, but there were issues with their output that perhaps were raised by someone else up the chain. I remember when I was at Schroeder's, I was running New York and the US, and we had headquarters in London. And I had a situation where we had technical issues around Y2K. And there were questions coming from London, and they had a completely different view of Y2K than we did because they had all kinds of legacy systems that were very much at risk. We were a relatively new business. We didn't have any of that exposure. So I sort of thought, these people are just fanatical. They think the sky is falling. Why don't they relax? We don't have any of this stuff. And my IT guy kept telling me, we're fine. We don't have any of this stuff. Tell them to go away. And I did. And it was a huge mistake, because it turned out all they really wanted was for this fellow to complete a series of forms that were in keeping with global protocol, which is normal safety and control for a big global company. And he was telling me it was all handled. It wasn't. I made the mistake of listening to him. I nearly got canned over that. And I ended up terminating him when the truth was found. But that sort of changed my view of what being the good shepherd means. It doesn't simply mean that every member of the flock gets uninterrupted nurturing and forgiveness in the Christian tradition that we all know and revere. Oftentimes, being the good shepherd means identifying that sheep that will keep the rest of the flock from making its way to the food supply or the water supply without falling down and not making it and maybe dying or whatever, or not prospering, not producing the number of lambs that would keep the flock healthy and vibrant. So I've really come to the point in business life, looking at the Christian tradition, of saying, look, the most important thing is truth, always. And part of truth is that if you have people who are sorry/dirtballs, it's not a service to anybody, including them, to keep them around. If they've done something that merits them being somewhere else, then they need to be somewhere else, and do not let any grass grow under your feet getting them there, period.
And do you differentiate in your mind with the years of sort of reflecting on this and the seasoning that comes with being a leader? Do you differentiate in your mind between someone who is a good player but has made, let's call it a technical mistake or a performance mistake, as opposed to an integrity mistake?
Oh, yes.
Because in my mind, I see them as two different buckets. How would you parse those two?
I couldn't agree more. Somebody who's made a competence error, that's a question of placement in the organization. And assuming they still have some level of competence that fits somewhere, then fine. They can be perfectly happy with a certain set of responsibilities that don't go any higher. Or you don't test the known weakness in their talent set. But if you have someone who's got an integrity issue, particularly if something comes up that raises it, and it comes to the point of me having a visit with them, you know, the questions are going to be asked, and if it's clear that there's been deception, and heaven forbid they try and deceive me directly, game over.
Yeah.
No questions asked. And one of the things I was saying when David and I were talking about this earlier is that is a completely different level of decision-making in the public sector than it is in the private world. I've done both. And when you're in finance, for example, in Manhattan, you're dealing with people who are highly compensated. You're dealing with businesses that are either highly profitable or they'll be gone. And in that circumstance, the common way that one weeds the bad apple out of the barrel involves a large check and a non-disclosure agreement. So ultimately, the level of hardship is pretty minimal. You send somebody out the door with $750,000 and they're already, somebody who's highly compensated, they're not going to miss any trips to the buffet, and their kids aren't going to have to drop out of school, and their wife will still have nice clothes and all of that. Public sector, if I terminate a senior officer in my organization, we're in Tallahassee, Florida. There aren't 500 other financial institutions to go to work at. There are none. And these are public employees. So there is no money that comes with you out the door. There is no NDA. The termination is, in fact, a public record. So you are really branding somebody on the face. And if it's somebody who's, say, in their 50s, and they're in the state pension system, depending on what they did and the nature of it, heaven forbid if it's criminal, the pension's gone. I've never had one of those, I'm happy to say. But I've had plenty of people where somebody did something that you just sort of thought, I'm disappointed you did that, and I'm shocked that you did it, and you can't take it back, so here's your choice. And you've got about 5 minutes to make it. Here are 2 letters. One's a resignation, the other's termination. Sign the first, the second one goes away, and you've got a decent record, and I'm not going to put anything in it to taint you going forward. That's the closest I can do to writing somebody a big check. And I won't do that if somebody's done something that's so bad it would be a peril to others for me not to disclose it. I wouldn't do that. And I'm not going to lie to somebody who calls me up for a reference.
So is it fair to say that's your way of trying to show grace, even if there's a consequence for someone's behaviors, that you might differentiate between someone who's done something that you would let them resign with some dignity intact versus someone who's saying, sorry, I am obliged to dismiss you?
That's right. And the other thing that I want to get out of that exercise, the other half of that trade, so to speak, is you want to affirm to all of the other people, all of the other colleagues who have done the right things, this is why you're here, and this is what happens when you don't do what you're doing. So thank you for doing what you're doing. Please continue it. Yeah. That's a very important message.
Many moons ago, I worked for IBM, and they would survey everything, amazing employee surveys and data, longitudinal data going back forever. And the one thing that continuously stuck in employees' craw was not whether they thought someone was being paid more or making more money or better opportunities. It's if IBM didn't weed out a poor performer. If someone was, certainly if it's an integrity issue, that was a no-brainer, that really upset people. But if someone was just in the wrong job, the wrong fit, to not step up to that really bothered people. And certainly if it's integrity, because you're sending a message to everybody.
Right.
Yeah. I want to talk about staying in this space of when someone's done something wrong, even maybe self-reporting. Do we go forward knowing that, frankly, you could be putting your career or your livelihood on the line, or do you kind of lay low and hope no one noticed and go away? Do you mind sharing that story from of your daughter's childhood a while ago? Because it's a business story in a way, because maybe you prepared her for something in life. I don't know.
Yeah, the situation was when my oldest daughter was, I think, whatever the oldest grade in middle school is, 8th grade, I suppose, something like that. The school was having a dance, and in the town we lived in Connecticut, the tradition was that the girls, the different groups of girls, would get together with their friends. They'd go to someone's home. They'd all do their makeup and their hair and put their dresses on together. The parents would all show up an hour or 2 later. We would all have cocktails. The girls would come down the staircase. We'd all take pictures like they were, movie stars or something. And then the kids would go off to the dance.
Are you sure we aren't in the South? You sure we aren't in the South here?
Right.
No,
we're in the southwest of Fairfield County. So this happens at this event, and we're at a beautiful home of some folks that some of you probably know. And my daughter's boyfriend called me about 45 minutes later and said, Mr. Williams, there's real trouble. It turns out that Katie and her friends, that the girl who was hosting the party had smuggled some vodka from her parents' booze supply. These girls know nothing about drinking, so they have some Dixie cups, and they're downing straight vodka at room temperature. That would put me on the floor in about 2 seconds, and I've got a fair amount of experience with alcohol, and because I'm an Episcopalian, also known as Whiskeypalians. And so the boyfriend calls me and says, so here's what's happened. We just drove up to where the dance is, and we saw 2 of Katie's friends being ejected. And I spoke with one of them, and they were flushed in the face. The teachers at the door immediately knew something was up, and they had a breathalyzer. I thought, good Lord, what's gone wrong with the world? A breathalyzer for 15-year-olds or however old they were, 14? So he brings my daughter home. The following Monday, the dance was a Friday night. Kids come home from school. It's all over school that there's been this incident, and 5 or 6 of the girls all got caught, plus some other people.
So they didn't have a boyfriend that rescued them. They got
Correct.
caught, right?
So my daughter ducked it because she had a vigilant boyfriend, and there was a safe house within a few blocks, mine. And so the kids who got caught were all automatically suspended for a week. So we talked with Katie about this and said, you know, you do the same thing. You really can't let them go over for this and keep your mouth shut, because kids talk. Everybody's going to know you did this. And in our house, we have a reputation for telling the truth. So you've got to own up to this. So the dean was a friend of hers. She goes and sees the dean and explains this. And he is floored.
So she essentially confesses to the crime
Yes.
that she wasn't accused of yet.
Precisely.
Right.
She's flying high. Everything's great. There's no grand jury, nothing. She's good. And she goes and tells the dean, and the dean says, you know, I've never had an experience like this. And he says, you know, under the school rules, I have zero discretion here. If you are involved in consuming alcohol in connection with a school function, you're done. You get suspended for a week, and it's on your permanent record. And she said, well, it is what it is, but you know, I learned a lesson. So she does this, and later on, when it came time, several years later, when it came time for her to apply to colleges, she used that story. And the number of colleges.
For her essay.
Yeah, about what an experience I had from which I really learned something. So she used that story. And it was very powerful, and she ended up going to a school that a lot of people who can't get into Harvard or Yale or Princeton go to, Florida State, and was president of a sorority there and had a terrific career of leadership, and she's now a school teacher. So she's a leader for young people now.
That's terrific.
And the other side of that story, and my wife and I were very proud of her for doing that, because it was not without hardship, and she could have skipped it. The contrast was there was another person in that group who didn't self-report, and when the word got around, because all of the kids were interviewed by the school, and of course it was like, who else was there? What did we miss? So fortunately, we'd gotten ahead of that. Somebody else's name came up, and that person was called in, and they denied it. And the parents were called in, and the parents said, well, we were having a family religious event, and there was some drinking in connection with that. So no, this is nothing. This categorically was a person who was in the same room with my daughter. And here are the parents intervening, lying to school officials. Obviously, all the other kids find out about that, which means all the other parents know about it. And we just thought, you know, call me a stick in the mud, but I'm glad I did what I did. And let the chips fall where they may. At least I can hold my head up and know I told the truth.
And lesson.
Did she go to Harvard? I just wanted to
She could get into Florida State, so there was no need.
You know, I think about stories like that, and you know, people talk about where's the line and how close do you come to the line, and there but by the grace of God go I, or I would have been caught. It's really extraordinary parenting choice that you and your wife, that you two made to do that. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. So fast forward, how does that help us in business? What's truth-telling when you could put your job at stake, and faith? Like, what's all that have to do with each other?
Well, truth-telling obviously is pretty fundamental. Think of the commandments. Most of the guidelines there are very useful to follow, some more obvious than others, but they're all there for a reason, and they're revered for a reason. But on the truth-telling, I mean, just think about this. Probably the most important attribute any of us can seek in a colleague, a friend, a spouse, certainly a business partner, is what? It's integrity. If I can't trust you and you're not a person of good character, you're going to do nothing but get us both in trouble. And chances are, if I'm honest and you're not, I'm going to get the short end of that stick. Not where I want to be. And as a fiduciary, managing the amount of money that we do, and I know this will come as a shock, I literally can walk down the streets in New York City and people will stop me, maybe it's the bow tie, and other than saying, you really should get a better tie, they'll say, you're the Florida, yeah, I have so-and-so, let me just show you this. I mean, we get that every day by the hundreds. And so we can partner with anybody we want. How do we pick who we partner with and what comes of it? It's all down to integrity and character. And yes, talent matters, skill matters, execution skill matters, style matters, but none of it matters if it's not on a foundation of integrity. And when I think about the value that accrues to all parties when the integrity level is right and there's a level of mutual trust that's earned and completely proven through lengthy experience, relationships can scale to levels that are unbelievable. We're a very big organization economically, and big relationships for us are into the billions of dollars. The biggest relationship we have is close to $20 billion with a single institution. And we have relationships and eyeball relationships with the highest levels of institutions like that, and we know lots of them. And there are lots of them we would never choose to have that relationship with. So for those we do, when we have ideas about how to do things, who do you think we talk to? And since they trust us, and I had a call like this as recently as this afternoon, someone had an idea, something's about to change in the world, something could be done that if you were there early, you're going to make a lot of money, and if you're there in scale, you're really going to make a lot of money, and what do you think? You want to be there in scale? I'm thinking, yeah, I'd love to be there in scale. I think it sounds good. Why do you think I got that call? It's because it's a trusted relationship. And I'm not talking about any insider information or anything like that. It's all public information. But that's important.
So how do you size that up? I mean, I don't think anyone in this room would disagree with that, the importance of trust. But when someone new, or let's say I'm the marketing rep, or I'm the sales rep for my company, and what do you look for in someone? Do you have any signals or indicators of whether this has the potential to grow into a trusting relationship, or where you immediately sort of start back?
There are all kinds of gates, and some are amazingly simple. How many people here have ever been to Tallahassee, Florida? Marta has. Okay, so you know, how easy is it to fly to Tallahassee, Florida? What's it on the way to? What's there? Pardon? Right. No, that's the road to perdition. But anyway, but at any rate, if somebody calls me up and they're a money manager or financial services provider, there are exactly two institutions, maybe three, that have money in Tallahassee. The Florida State Board's the big one. Florida State University Foundation is the second biggest one, and I've been on their investment committee for 15 years and chaired it for a good part of that time. Nothing happens there that I don't know about. And then there's the City of Tallahassee's pension fund, which is about the size of the name tags you're wearing. Not worth the airfare. And so if somebody calls me up and says, Ash, you know, I'm going to be in Tallahassee Thursday after next, and I'd really love to come by and tell you about our new blah, 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 blah. Really? Who are you seeing? Well, or worse, I'm going over to the foundation. I've got an appointment there. No, you don't. You're done, right there, dead meat. So there are all kinds of gates. And the other thing is when somebody starts describing what's going on with their firm, you know, we have very deep research capability. We have 200 people on our staff, 60 investment professionals, and every consultant you've ever heard of is either paid for, is either a full retainer or they're on what we call a speed dial, where we pay them a few bucks so we can call them anytime we want and they'll take the call immediately. We check people out really thoroughly. I mean, really thoroughly.
And you still agreed to come here tonight?
Well, I was amazed you let me come because I know you check people out too. But at any rate, you find out what people don't tell you. And that's a gating issue. You know, the first time you withhold something, what you've shown me is that when the information set favors you, if my information set is less complete than yours, and you choose to put me in the dark, if you've done that once, you'll do it again. And if the stakes are high, you'll do it faster and harder. And I'm not going to be on the end of that. So those are some of the things. And here's another one. We've had situations in the great financial crisis. I came back to the state board in the fourth quarter of 2008, and it was perfect. People said, aren't you terrified going? I said, are you crazy? The house is burned to the ground. I'm going to show up, we're going to rebuild it, and they're going to say, oh my God, it's Superman. That's exactly what's happened. That fund bottomed at 83. Here's the why I'm smart speech that Charles talked about. I got to throw it in because I didn't get it yesterday. The fund bottomed at $83 billion in March of 2009. We're now at an all-time high of $152 billion, and that's net of paying out $600 to $800 million a month in cash. So this thing has done one of those. But some players who had funds that were deeply disrupted during the crisis handled them artfully, did the right things, told the truth, said let's reason together and do the best we can through this very difficult situation and come through it to the best of our ability. We don't know where it'll be. Those relationships are intact.
Interesting. Have you ever been falsely accused of something?
I certainly have.
And how do you handle that? Both from a professional perspective, putting your day job hat on, but also to the extent that you talked about earlier, faith as a safe harbor. If you don't mind talking about that. Yeah,
the two interweave very neatly. I came back to the fund in the fourth quarter of 2008, as I said. And there was the incident that led to my coming back was there was a problem at the state board. We ran a cash pool for local governments in Florida, which sounds small and mundane. It was $34 billion. It was the biggest pool of its type in the United States. And there had been a problem at the board where they had depleted their staff in an effort to cut costs and depleted the supervisory ranks. And they had a very young person solely in charge of buying the securities for this pool. And there were some suitability issues where some asset-backed securities were purchased that were 144A securities, and where but Greenwich can you say all this stuff? And everybody goes, yeah, I get it. Go on, don't slow down. Yeah, come on. I love that. Tallahassee, it'd be, oh, the blackboard, and then the blocks, you know. And anyway, so there were suitability issues. There was a run on the bank. There was a huge crisis. The person who was in my job was humiliated and resigned in a public meeting of the trustees unexpectedly. They did a national search. Obviously, it failed, and there go I. That whole thing has gone on, and that is what happened immediately before I got there. And that had raised questions about, so how exactly did these securities get bought?
Just to fast forward, essentially, she accuses you
yes.
of self-dealing or whatever, taking advantage of friendships and
yes.
so forth. And did it stick? I mean, when you're being in the newspapers, and I've read some of those articles, I mean, it's not pleasant when you see your name like that, is it? Like, so what did you do?
It wouldn't be pleasant for me to see your name like that.
No, I mean,
seeing my name like that is really bad.
I mean, just put the word self in front of this story, right?
Yeah. And
or your wife or your husband. I mean, this is personal.
This went on.
Particularly because it wasn't true.
Correct. This went on for 2 years. They had a whole team of reporters on this stuff, and they would just make stuff up, literally make stuff up, and that's why it eventually failed, because no other paper was picking it up, because it wasn't credible. And the national financial press, Bloomberg, Journal, New York Times, Reuters, they all know us. We don't, I mean, if you ever read anything negative about us in any of those places, chances are you have not. And what was going on was they would write these complicated stories, and because they weren't hooked to any specific news item, they weren't time sensitive. So the pattern was for every holiday weekend, Thanksgiving, 4th of July, New Year's Eve, Christmas, I was on the front page of that paper, big color picture. They hired a photographer that followed me for months, so they had lots of pictures of me. And they would, of course, find the ones where you had just, you know, stepped in something or something and had an inappropriate look on your face, so you look shady or distraught. And they would put this big picture above the fold with a banner headline, some of them actually in red, if you can imagine that. It was awful. But that kind of thing teaches you a couple of things. Number one, truth matters, and being on the bad end of a lie really hurts. And when your own reputation that you've spent a life building is called out like that, you find out quickly that your friends are your friends, and the people who know you, and they stay put, and others don't care. And that's a lesson. If you've ever been through anything like that, you will find out in a hurry who your friends are. And the other thing that's nice is when something like that finally ends, it's just nice to have it over, and you realize it's sort of like if you've never been in a hurricane, you don't understand how nice it is not to be in a hurricane. So it's like that.
Well, I think that. Well, a few minutes for questions. I should have mentioned earlier, part of our flow is to invite you, our gathered friends, to ask any question of Ash you might wish to do, and then we'll take a few more minutes and do that, and then wrap ourselves up. Nick, do you want to start us?
Yeah, my middle name's David. How do you integrate your religion with your everyday work in investments and so forth? That's usually the person David.
He's taking over from me. I'm slipping up here.
Well, I don't know that it would come into the investment process directly. It's primarily along the lines of fairness, of honesty, etc. And you know, we are the good shepherds. We're fiduciaries. My work empowers the retirement income of 1 million people who gave their lives to public service. These are school teachers, cops, firemen. They have hard jobs. They do them conscientiously. Florida, unlike the Northeast, does not have strong unions. These people do not get paid a lot of money. The average salary of one of my beneficiaries is less than $40,000 a year. The average balance, we also run a defined contribution plan with 150,000 people in it. The average balance in that defined contribution plan is something like $2,500. It's tiny. So these are people who I think deserve the honor of retiring with sufficient replacement income to live a life of dignity. And an alarming number of Americans won't be able to do that. And if we screw this up, these may not be able to do it either.
So the parable of the talents is probably one you think of from time to time?
It absolutely is. And it's not good enough to just go into cash and sit there.
Yeah.
You've got to go do some things, take some appropriate risks, and make some returns.
Other questions? Yeah. Sorry.
So in the investment business today, there's a lot of talk and conversation about socially responsible investing, or ESG, which has some kind of moral and ethical implications on how you're actually investing your money. How do you think about that? How do you implement that?
Well, I would say that the media and people in general are very good at taking things that are common sense and putting labels on them. And once they get a label, I mean, how far back do you want to go? Zero-based budgeting, management by objective. I mean, there's a million of these things. Somebody's got to sell a book, so there's got to be a phrase. The way I would think about ESG is, first of all, we don't have any explicit screens.
And ESG, for those who don't know, is
environmental, social responsibility, and governance.
Right.
Now, we happen to be founders of the largest corporate governance entity in the world, which is the, I've just gone completely blank on it. It's based in Washington. The Council of Institutional Investors, whose membership has trillions and trillions of dollars under management. We were one of the 7 founders of that group back in the early 80s, mid-80s, I guess. And I was very involved in that and still am. One of my employees is chairman of the board of the group. But we basically look at all of these things as simple fundamental investment analysis. When we look at a fund, for example, we're looking at sustainability in the context of ESG from the perspective of how's the governance of the fund set up? Has the founder arranged the economics of the fund so that there's proper alignment with the other team members and there's a proper path of succession? Because there's a pattern in life where people get older and pretty soon they quit what they're doing, or they quit at some point. They may have to quit. And if there's no succession, you're out of luck. The tide's just gone out and you're beached.
Other questions? Yeah.
How do you ensure that your rank and file within the organization to align themselves with your values, your principles, and the goals that you set? I mean, you've gotten some instances of like rogue traders and all these large Wall Street firms. How do you protect yourself and make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so if you didn't hear, if I could paraphrase, how do you imbue and create and sustain a culture of ethics and values like you personally are trying to live by? Just statistically, you've got more than one of those 20, back to your earlier analogy. So how do you, for all the good apples and those who might be swayed one or the other, try to create this culture of values and ethics?
That's a good question, and we do it in a really pretty simple and basic and pretty mechanical way. We're governed by policies. and we have policies relating to everything from portfolio construction to personal behavior and standards and requirements under Florida law. We have all kinds of bizarre requirements that how we get anything done under these requirements, I have no idea. Public records law, everything we do is a public record. The only exception to that is if some document belongs to a partner of ours somewhere or someone we do business with that has proprietary information. Under the law, we have a limited exception for that, and they can make a redaction. But the penalty, if they make that redaction falsely, just for reasons of convenience, they have to certify in writing that it meets 4 legal tests, and they're guilty of perjury if they falsify that document. So they take it very seriously and spend a lot of money on their lawyers. But anyway, we have policies that cover all that kind of thing. And then we have policies about personal behavior. And we have policies that cover personal behavior that would reflect poorly on the board, personal behavior that would raise questions of integrity, personal behavior that would violate any of the sorts of things that I would call HR-related laws, sexual harassment, hostile workplace, racial discrimination, bullying, all that kind of stuff. We've got it all covered in our policies. And everybody, including me, has to take training that takes an aggregate of about 6 hours once a year. It's done online. And you do all these various modules that demonstrate your command of the detail of what your responsibilities are. You have to take an online exam afterwards, and until you score 80 or better, you can't get out of the training, and your employment won't continue if you don't pass all that training. And then you sign documents at the end of every module that says, I understand if I violate any of these policies, I may be terminated. So you've got them in writing. There's no, I didn't know the ball had to have a certain number of pounds per square inch of air. It was cold. The thing went flat by itself. Yeah, there's none of that. No.
Let me press you a little bit, though, because most big organizations have those set of required documents that need to be signed in training. But you can have 1 million compliance officers, 1 million formal checks, but there's still the day-to-day, there's the wink, the nod, the culture, the air people breathe. How do you try, how many people do you have in the organization again?
A couple hundred.
Couple. So I mean, do you walk the floor? Do you tell stories? I mean, how do you, in the unofficial ways, communicate these messages in addition to the obligatory stuff?
Yes, I do both those things. I walk around, I know people. Here's the other thing we have going for us that makes it a lot easier than in a big urban environment where you have people from all over the world and they scatter at night and go to different places in their commutes. Somebody goes to Connecticut, somebody goes to New Jersey, somebody goes to Long Island. There's no interaction outside the workplace. We're a small town. We all go to football games together. We all run into each other at the barbecue place, all that kind of stuff. And we know each other. And everybody knows everybody. And there are lots of people who've been around there forever. And so reputations matter. It is a small town. And we've got a lot of employees who've worked for us for 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. And they understand the standards. And the employees all talk. And if something's not right, somebody's going to squeak about it because they feel something's not being properly handled.
That's interesting you say that, because I was thinking in my mind that can cut 2 ways, right? That everyone can kind of have a group cover-up, blue wall of silence. You might think you don't want to rat on your friend, don't want to fink someone out. But what you just said is that it's a healthy enough organism that it will repel the toxic agent, if I'm not reading too much into it.
A perfect overlay for this group. Sounds corny, but this is the South. People are religious. They take integrity seriously. And, if you know anything about big-time college football, particularly at Florida State, we've had a few issues that gets everybody talking about, is this guy telling the truth? Or what's it worth to us to have a star player who commits crimes and embarrasses our institution? What's that worth? What are we doing this for? So everybody understands the importance of behavior. We get some very simple examples served up to us without asking for them.
So let me wrap up with the last question. It's one actually, it's part of an exam question I ask my students. And that's that it goes back to this question of, I'm not really so worried about the bad apples, because hopefully you don't hire them in the first place. And if you do happen to hire them in your organization, you fire them really quickly the first time you find out that they're just not redeemable, shall we say. My focus is on the good apples. People like, I think, there's probably a few saints in this room. I doubt there's any scoundrels. So most of us are, in that malleable middle. And how many people do we see do the perp walk, who see be accused of something and they're rightly accused of something, not unjustly accused? Somehow they let their guard down. They started believing their own press. They got a little bit cocky, or they developed an entitlement mentality. I'm working so hard, and I deserve this, and I deserve that. How do you stay? So here's the question. How do you stay ethically fresh? I don't mean sassy, but and maybe it's some of your faith rhythms. I don't know. You talked about sort of the comfort and the ritual of services or other things. How do you stay ethically fresh so that you don't become, or I don't become, one of these statistics that, what was I thinking?
Well, I think the main thing, I come back to the single most fundamental thing, which is the truth. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that the second you stray away from the truth and you're trying to cover something up, you have, the phrase, oh, what complex webs we weave when at first we try to deceive. Well, first of all, at my age, my memory is not good enough, and I'm too lazy to come up with a complex web. I've got too many things on my plate without having to weave webs. So I just tell the truth, knowing that takes care of itself. And I don't have to remember a story. All I have to remember is the facts. And I tell people that every day, and I think if you set the right examples, and again, it's not that big an organization. 200 it's not an aircraft carrier. Maybe economically it is, but in terms of the human resource, it's not. You can know what's going on, and you can send the right signals, and plus, people just know you, and they know what you do, and they see what you do, and they see how you handle things. And if you send those messages, you can reaffirm the values every day in the way you deal with people.
Thank you for that. How about a round of applause for that?